Where in the world am I? Okay, there's your first clue. Keep your eyes peeled. I'm going to give you another clue in a second. Did you spot the clue? Have you worked it out yet? And that's the giveaway. That's right. Today I am running through the city of Detroit, Michigan, in the United States of America. This is the first of 3 cities that I visited on a little tour of the Midwestern United States that I recently undertook. This was my first time travelling around this part of North America, so I was seeing each of these places for the first time with totally fresh eyes. Everywhere I went for a jog, and I filmed it. And that's what you're watching now. So that there is Hostel Detroit, where I stayed, and which I'd highly recommend to any traveller coming to the city. Really comfortable and affordable. Within a few minutes of setting off, I'd already run past this billboard advertising a local cannabis dispensary, as well as this one for a nearby shooting range. God bless America. So, just coming into view now, this striking, not to mention gigantic building is Michigan Central Station. At the time it was opened in 1914, it was the world's tallest railway terminal. Today, for all its grandiosity, this building is no longer a functional railway station. In fact, the last passenger train to depart from Michigan Central set off from the station back in 1988, the year in which it finally closed after decades of gradual decline. I've done a little bit of homework on this station. Let me tell you a little bit about what I found out. In the early years of the 20th century, railroads in the United States were booming. By the 1910s, 250,000 miles of railroad connected every corner of the country. Americans in their millions took advantage of the new opportunities for travel that the revolutionary new railroad network afforded, with fast movement across this vast country, now for the first time accessible to the masses. It wasn't just the railroads that were booming. So too was the city of Detroit. Speedily gaining a reputation as the industrial powerhouse of the Midwestern United States, the first decades of the 20th century saw population growth on an extraordinary scale, a sign of the economic vitality of the city and its abundance of job opportunities. The opening of Michigan Central Station was a serious statement of success and ambition. More than just a rail station, this building was a symbol of Detroit, cementing itself as one of the major cities of the United States. Its construction was simultaneous with that of Grand Central Terminal in New York City, one of only a very select number of rail stations in America that can match its size and splendor. Both buildings were designed by the same architectural firm. So, what happened to Michigan Central Station? Why did it close? Well, the colossal popularity and profitability of the railroads didn't last. There is perhaps a certain irony to be found in the fact that it was the very product that Detroit's booming industry was based on that sounded the death knell for the railroads and Michigan Central Station. Of course, I'm talking about the automobile. The Ford Motor Company was founded in Detroit in 1903. General Motors came along a few years later, acquiring a portfolio of Detroit-based manufacturers. The city was now firmly established as the world capital of automobile production. A new nickname for Detroit was coined Motor City. And Motor City it well and truly is. Detroit is a city designed around the car. And that, of course, tends to be true of North American cities in general, but Detroit is definitely an extreme example. And I say that even though right now I'm jogging through what I believe to be one of the city's more pedestrian-friendly neighbourhoods. Ooh, now that's an attractively painted row of shops, bars, restaurants across the road there. Those buildings have to be 19th century. They've been really nicely preserved. This is the historic district of Corktown, named for the immigrants from County Cork in Ireland who settled here in the 1840s and 50s. So I think along here is a reasonably nice stretch to go for a run, even if it doesn't do such a good job of illustrating the car worship that has guided much of Detroit's urban planning. I can't even say that's the reason that this street, Michigan Avenue, is so bloody wide, because this is an ancient road by American standards. This is the road you would take if you were travelling by stagecoach west out of Detroit and across Michigan, before Michigan was even a state, long before the age of the automobile. So here in Corktown, which claims to be the city's oldest neighbourhood, if you know what you're looking for, you really can catch a glimpse of historic Detroit before it expanded into a vast metropolis. Even in historic Corktown, though, you may have noticed I did have to cross a huge freeway just to get from the northern part of the neighbourhood to Michigan Avenue and Michigan Central Station. So it's not like Corktown escaped the urban severance that took place on a massive scale in Detroit and across the United States in the 1950s and 60s. There's an abundance of examples of neighbourhoods like this that were essentially cut in half during this era of car infrastructure construction on a ginormous scale. And of course, if you were unlucky enough to live in the path of a planned freeway like this one, well, you've got no choice but to simply say goodbye to your home. Demolition and displacement to make way for freeways was widespread. I've scoured sources online to see how many people were affected in Detroit alone, and while it seems that estimates vary, about 40,000 people appears to be a fairly conservative estimate for the number of people displaced by these huge roads which were carved through neighbourhoods across the city almost indiscriminately. This map here gives you a sense of the web of highways that kind of converge on downtown Detroit. So I've run, I think, about a mile and a half or so east along Michigan Avenue, and I'm now on the cusp of downtown Detroit. And now these imposing high-rise buildings are coming more clearly into view. Particularly menacing is the AT&T building here, which presents itself from this side as a 100-meter high sheer wall of impenetrable granite. I mean, wowza, that is a building that is not to be messed with. Downtown Detroit has for me quite a distinctive architectural character. I like it actually. You'll see as we pass through that Detroit's skyline for the most part is made up of Art Deco style skyscrapers, most of which date to the 1920s and which project stability and civic pride through their solid and regular forms, their monumental scale, and the odd neoclassical flourish. I know you can also see a big glass skyscraper in the background there, which does run against the narrative I'm trying to spin here, but nonetheless, modern high-rise buildings really are few and far between in Detroit compared with most American cities of a similar size. Lots of American cities do have well-preserved early 20th century skyscrapers, but they still lack the architectural coherence of Detroit because they're jumbled up with lots of newer builds. Personally, I find Detroit's skyline really compelling. When I take it in, I'm drawn to the faded opulence of the Art Deco architecture. In my imagination, it blends with the echoes of bygone industry, the growl of engines, and a bit of the grit that Detroit is known for, to evoke shades of noir and a sense of unfulfilled utopian ambition. Anyway, launching on from that, I will say that as much as I can appreciate Detroit's skyline on an aesthetic level, it does also tell an economic story that isn't so pretty. Because the reason that lots of high-rise buildings were built in the first half of the 20th century is because that was when Detroit was a prosperous city and seeing lots of investment. And the reason that not many were built in the second half of the 20th century, well, that was because Detroit ceased to be a prosperous city. 1913, the year that Michigan Central Station opened, was also incidentally the year that Henry Ford introduced the moving assembly line to the Highland Park Ford plant located on the edge of Detroit. The moving assembly line reduced the time taken to produce each car by 87%. Ford doubled his workers' wages. Detroit's already rapid industrialization was turbocharged. As we've seen, Detroit reached its apex as a hub of manufacturing in the 1920s. The city grew in every direction, outwards, upwards, in population and in status. All this growth, all this success was the product of industry. The Detroit Industry Murals by the Mexican artist Diego Rivera might just be the most intricate and thought-provoking artworks to confront head-on the theme of industrialization that I have ever seen. This set of 27 frescoes were painted by Rivera and his assistants directly onto the walls of the interior courtyard of the Detroit Institute of Arts, and were completed in 1933. They are masterful artworks. Taken as a whole, they are breathtaking. Let's have a closer look at the murals and see how they fit into the story of Detroit. The two largest panels face each other on the north and south walls of the courtyard. They depict imagined scenes of workers assembling automobiles in one of the Ford factories. The working men are presented concentrating intently on their physically intensive manual labor. They are presented as equals and with dignity. The scenes depicted here did not closely represent the reality of conditions for workers in the auto industry in Detroit in the early 1930s. Rather, they depicted Rivera's hope. He painted a harmonious picture of factories full of people and bursting with activity, even though these murals were produced in the midst of the Great Depression, which wrought on the city of Detroit a collapse in jobs and social unrest, sparking deadly clashes between the newly unemployed and the goons of their former bosses. Rivera painted black men and white men working side by side, even though at the time the Ford factories remained racially segregated. And yet Rivera still saw reason to hope. And by the 1940s, that optimism was at least partially vindicated. Jobs were returning to Detroit. The United Auto Workers, founded in 1935, was rapidly becoming one of the most progressive and influential labor unions in the United States. A historic strike in 1941 forced Ford to boost wages and desegregate its workforce. Let's be clear, Detroit in the 1940s was no utopia, and that was still especially true if you were black. But life had improved. What's so impressive about these murals is not simply that Rivera was able to capture that progress, but that he was able to do so before much of it had been achieved. Painting during the Great Depression, he was able to look through the economic gloom and imagine a better way. And others went out and fought to bring that vision to life. Elsewhere across the murals, Rivera's optimism is rightly tempered with caution. The awesome capabilities of industry and technology, both good and bad, are acknowledged. While on the one hand we have advances in medical technology celebrated here in an image inspired by Christian iconography, in another panel the destructive potential of industry is highlighted through the depiction of bomber planes. This proved particularly prescient, a major factor causing Detroit's economic rejuvenation in the 1940s was, in fact, the Second World War. Countless jobs were created as the city began producing vehicles and weapons for the US military on a large scale. I have not even scratched the surface of the messaging woven into every inch of the Detroit Industry Murals. They are packed full of symbolism, a rich commentary with much to say about technology, people, nature, and the relationship between them. I'd really recommend this video from the DIA if you want to find out more. I'll link that along with all my other sources in the description. And we're back in the heart of downtown Detroit. So, as I've already alluded to, the high rate of employment and economic prosperity that Detroit enjoyed in the 1940s didn't last. Things took a downturn in the 50s and have never fully recovered. That's mainly to do with job losses resulting from further automation in car manufacturing, as well as Detroit losing its stronghold as the world capital of auto production, especially after Japanese and European models started to make serious inroads into the American market from roughly the 1970s onwards. Let's for a moment return to Michigan Central Station, which I talked about earlier in this video as a symbol of Detroit's ambition in the early 20th century. Well, given the fate that befell the building decades later after it closed, it could just as readily serve as a symbol of Detroit's decline. These photographs show Michigan Central Station derelict, a place built on a steadfast belief in the continued success of the city of Detroit, abandoned. The reversal of fortune captured in these images perhaps mirrors that which was experienced at the same time by many of the people of Detroit. Detroit's expansive network of highways was also constructed under the assumption that Detroit would keep growing, which it didn't. Detroit's population actually fell year on year in the second half of the 20th century. But by this point, the Detroit urban area had already expanded to an area half the size of Luxembourg, so the city continues to struggle with extremely low population density. It's fascinating to compare Metro Detroit with Greater London, which I don't think feels overcrowded, but which has a population roughly 2.5 times that of Metro Detroit, living in half the area, so 5 times the population density. Here's footage I took while I was on a bus not that far out of the city's urban core. And you can see how much open space there is, lots of space. which is not unusual in the US, but equally is not that conducive for city vitality. Still, you see some amazing buildings, but lots of them are vacant. They are boarded up, like this one, for instance, and it's typical of what you see everywhere. Here's a different part of the city, and we're going past some commercial units now, but it's the same kind of picture. It does give you a very clear sense of the challenges still facing Detroit. But, it's not all doom and gloom. I, for one, really enjoyed my short visit to Detroit, and I saw lots to appreciate about the city. The day I picked for this run happened to be the day of Detroit Pride, and in a moment we'll run past people queuing up to get into the main space for that on the riverside. You might just be able to hear some of the preaching of an evangelical anti-gay troll just on my left as I cross the road, but he'll soon be drowned out by the revelling masses here for a good time.
As Son of God to save our soul. But yet if you reject that, if you refuse that, if you put away that correction, that reproof, and you humble yourself, you rebel against God, you're going to weep out. Your soul is to hell for that. You can go to heaven.
That was fun. Speaking to people in Detroit, I got a sense that despite lingering challenges, things are looking up a little bit for the city. For a start, Detroit's population is at last growing again. That's a really positive sign. From what I understand, downtown Detroit has become much more vibrant in recent years, in part thanks to some successful restoration projects. It definitely looks like a healthy downtown to me, but maybe that wouldn't have been the case had I visited 10 or 20 years ago. Let's take one last look at Michigan Central Station. While it won't be reopening as a rail station anytime soon, it's certainly in better shape today than it was in those photos from several years ago that I showed you. After an extensive restoration, it opened again in 2024 under a new guise. It's now at the center of the brand new Michigan Central Innovation District, thanks to an investment just shy of $1 billion, courtesy of who else but the Ford Motor Company. Hopefully this investment will create the economic boost to Detroit that it's forecast to. And maybe in this new chapter for Michigan Central Station, this colossal piece of Motor City heritage can come to be a positive symbol for Detroit once again. Now as a symbol of renewal and rejuvenation. And that's the note that I'd like to end this video on. I want to finish my run, but I've got a little confused. I was hoping to find a way down to the Detroit River path, but I think I've gone the wrong way. That's Canada, by the way, over there, the other side of the river. Well, here seems as good a place as any to call it a day. Hope you enjoyed watching. If you fancy, you can always give this video a like, or you can subscribe to the channel if you want to see me run around some other cities. I'm heading back on the road now. Next stop, Chicago. Hopefully I'll see you there.